Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing some French country floral thrift flips using the new IOD transfers. My first project is this lovely clock that I picked up for a few dollars at the thrift store. It does work, but I wasn't too crazy about the front of the clock face. So my first step is to remove the hands of the clock. I very carefully pulled the little gold pin off, and then I took the hands off, and then I'm going to put those in a little Ziploc bag for safekeeping. The other issue with this clock was that there was damage to the design on the front up the top. Now I couldn't pull the whole thing off. I was worried I would be starting to wreck the clock itself, so I'm going to super glue that back down so that we have a nice solid base to paint on. I'm using Gorilla Super Gel Glue. I really like the base as is, so I'm going to tape that off to make sure that I don't get any paint on it. Next, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Buttercream Chalk Mineral Paint. This is a chalk mineral, so it will stick to most surfaces. So I'm going to work my way around and paint the entire clock face. It's going to take about 2.5 coats to get the coverage that I want. You can find a full product list in the description of this video below, and you can get most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. To reduce brush strokes, it's a good idea to use a synthetic brush, and you can see I'm using a smaller brush for this. You definitely want to think about how big your project is when you're selecting your brush, and you can see that I am changing directions to get the coverage that I want on the clock face, but then I will go back and I will smooth out my brush strokes all in one direction. It just looks a lot tidier if you do it this way. On my final coat, I have sped up the drying process a little bit to get some cracks in the paint to add to that vintage detail. Next, I'm going to be using the new IOD Seed Catalogue Transfer. I've already done a video on this. Make sure you check that out. I will make sure that I link it. I'm going to be using this lovely Maze Roses design. Now, this is a smaller version of a larger transfer that they just came out with, except it's a bit more of a sepia tone. I thought that this would look beautiful on the front of my clock, but before I can attach it, I do need to cut it apart so we can make it fit. So once I've worked out how I want to position it, I'm going to take my scissors and very carefully cut along the center. It's very helpful that we have these grid lines to follow. And then I'm also going to be cutting out the word maze so that I can reposition that. Once I have my transfer ready, I'm going to position that where I think it's going to go, and we're going to work out what we need to do for the bottom. So here you can see that our flowers will line up really well, but I do want to remove that typography as well so that we can reposition that and get it to look exactly the way that we want. Now that I have my transfer cut into pieces, I'm going to start with the bottom. So I'm going to peel off the backing and very carefully position my design where I want it to go and then press down. I like to do some rubbing over the entire design first, and then you can see I picked a corner and I'm rubbing and lifting that plastic as I go. And I'm going to go slow so that if I miss any spots, I can come back and rub a little bit more. Once I have the first part of the transfer down, I can move on to the second part. So I'm going to carefully position that, and you can see it meets up perfectly. And then I'm going to press it down when I have it in the right position. And again, I'm going to do a bunch of rubbing over the entire design first, and then I will pick a corner and very carefully start lifting the design up. IOD transfers are super easy to use. You can put them on a lot of different surfaces. In my last video, I actually added them to fabric as well. So they're a really great way to just add that bit of something special to your projects. So I've rubbed it all down, I've burnished it, and now we need to add the text. So I'm just having a little look with the text position here, and I'm going to start with the text down the bottom first. And again, I'm just rubbing the design down, and then we're going to add the word maze to the top, and then I will rub and burnish the whole design again. So you just want to make sure you've got it all down properly. Now I'm going to seal the clock face with some of Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in clear, and then I will buff that wax back with a microfiber cloth. Next, I removed the masking tape, and then I reattached the hands of the clock. I wanted to age this up a little bit further, so I'm taking my IOD black ink pad and I'm just pulling it around the edges, and this is just going to give a fun little worn look on the edges because the frame around the outside is already black. I also decided to add a little bit of Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in Brown, just again to add to that vintage feel. So I'm just lightly rubbing my brush along the surface of the clock. We've already got that clear wax down, so I'm going to be able to wipe back as much as I want. And this is just your personal preference. If this is a little bit too rustic for you, you could always leave this step out. And here's our finished clock. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I feel like it was a little bit dated before, and now it has a fresh new look with a vintage feel. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. Our next project is this set of scales. Now these are not vintage and they looked way too new and cold to me, so I'm going to give them a makeover. I'm going to give this set of scales 2 coats of Rustoleum's cream spray paint. I went really light with each coat so that I had minimal chance of drips, and I have already taped off the face of the scales as well with masking tape. I'm going to paint the entire thing, and then I'm also going to be painting the bowl that sits on top. Some of you may be thinking, oh my gosh, why is she doing this? But honestly, this is going to be a really fresh new look for these scales, and it's not going to affect the use of them either. So now that my spray paint is all dry, I've come in the next day and I'm going to take off the masking tape from the front of the scales, and I'm very carefully doing that. Now there were a few spots where there was a little bit of the paint that bled through. I'm not too worried. I'll scrape off as much as I can, but I don't think it will be super noticeable. I'm then going to be using IOD's new Elysium transfer. This is an absolutely gorgeous design with so many lovely florals, but don't think that you have to use it in one big design. It does come with instructions to use it like that. It can be added together, but I'm going to pull it apart and just use what I want. I'm going to select some florals to put on the side of my scale. So you can see I'm just sort of laying it up against the area where I think that I might want to put it. While I'm working out what part of the design I want to use, I'm thinking about scale. I feel like these larger flowers would be a little bit too much on this set of scales, but these smaller flowers with the text I felt would go perfect. My first step is to remove some of the excess sections down the bottom. It's just making it a little bit hard for me to visualize how much I am going to need to cut off, and then I'm going to crease the areas where I'm going to need to cut. Now the lines are going to be really helpful here, so I've creased the area where I am going to trim, and I'm just going to work in sections to make sure that I don't cut off an area that I wanted to keep. It wouldn't be too much of a big deal if I did, but it's still better to just go slow when you're doing this. So again, I'm just creasing any of the areas where I think that I'm going to need to cut. If there's overlapping flowers, but I think I might be able to actually bend them around and use them, you'll see that I do trim some of it off, but some of them I leave on. So here I thought that it might be nice to wrap around the florals up the top, but it's a bit tricky to work with those at the moment, so I'm going to trim them off, and then I can always come back and reposition them wherever I want them to go. Now that I have my transfer cut to size, I can peel the backing off and position it where I want it to be and get started. So I'm going to press down, and then once I have it down, I'm going to use the transfer stick and I'm going to go around the outside first. There is a little bit of an indentation around the outside, so I'm just making sure that it's stuck well to that, and particularly around the bottoms. And you can see I just had to do a little bit of trimming there just to get that transfer to bend around the corner a little bit. These are very flexible, but it can be a good idea to put a little cut wherever you're having trouble getting your transfer to go around. So I'm just going to work my way across this transfer, and you can see I'm lifting it as I'm rubbing it. and anywhere that something isn't releasing, I'm just putting it back down and then rubbing again. These are really very easy to use. For the top section, I've repositioned my scales and I'm bending the transfer over. I'm holding it down firmly with one hand and then rubbing it down with the other. I don't want that transfer to come away before I've completely rubbed and transferred that image. So definitely go slow if you're going around a corner. Once I have the transfer down, I'm going to rub and burnish it with the carrier sheet. Now I need to work out my design for the other side, so I'm going to position that transfer where I think I'm going to want to cut, and I'm going to repeat the same steps as previous. I'm going to crease where I want to cut, checking each time to make sure that I have the correct spot to cut, and then very carefully cutting out my design. Once I have my transfer cut to side, I can start on the other side here and I can very carefully lay my transfer where I want it to go and repeat the same process as before, rubbing and burnishing the design down. These are a very easy way to add a pop of color or typography to most surfaces. I would test your surface if you're unsure, test a small little area to see how your transfer goes, but they can stick to fabric, they can stick to pots, they can stick to most smooth surfaces, and you just want to make sure that you do seal them when you're done. I will be sealing this with Rustoleum's clear satin sealer. I want this to have a little bit of a shine, and that will be enough to protect it. And you'll still be able to use this as a scale in the kitchen, and you'll still be able to carefully wipe off any spills. And here are our finished scales. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I feel like it was very plain, very cold before. Now it has character, now it has charm. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. Our next project is this little metal bucket that I found. I actually really like the color that it is already, so all I'm going to do is give it a good clean to start off with. It had some sticky residue on there, so I'm using a razor to work it off, and also a product called Goo Gone, I think it's called, and it's really great at getting off any sticky substances or stubborn stains. Then I'm going to be using IOD's new seed catalog transfer, and I'm going to pick a design that's going to fit on the front of the bucket. So I thought this one would be perfect, so I'm very carefully trimming that out. To make this fit even better, I'm just laying the design over the top of the bucket, and then I'm going to trim off the text to start off with. I think that this is a great way to really customize your piece, to trim that off and perhaps reposition it in a new way. So I'm going to peel off the backing of the transfer and then very carefully position my design in the center. And when I'm happy with the position, I will press it down and start to rub the transfer down. So again, this is just a very simple process of rubbing your design down, and once you think that you've got your design down, you just lift the plastic up and keep going. Now there were some ridges in this one that I had to be mindful of, different levels, so I just made sure to really work the transfer into those sections. Same with around the bottom edge, just working my transfer onto the surface with my transfer stick. Once I have the main design down, I'm going to move on to the text, and I decided to further separate part of the text. I'm going to put the heading up the top first and rub and burnish that down like before, and then I'm going to reposition the text that we just cut off to fit the design. These transfers are a really easy way to update any sort of little buckets or pots that you have around the house that are maybe looking a little bit tired. They're super easy to use, and you can see with this one I didn't even paint my surface. I just popped that transfer onto my clean surface, and then I will seal this with Rustoleum's clear matte sealer. Before I sealed this, however, I did get some 220 grit sandpaper and I very lightly scuffed up the surface of the transfer just to give it a little bit more of an aged finish. And here's a look at the finished product. You can see it looks really sweet with a little IKEA plant sitting in it. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Let me know what you guys think of this in the comments. Our final project today are these sweet little pots. It's a set of 3 and they've actually got an attachment on the back if they wanted to maybe be attached to the wall. I'm going to be adding some transfers to these. So there's this design in the seed catalog pack and it has a lot of these lovely sepia tone florals and they have writing on them, and I decided that I would actually cut them apart and just put a couple of flowers on each or one on each, whatever will fit, and that way then I'm making this transfer go even further. I'm only going to use a couple from this design. So I've trimmed out what I need. My surface is clean. I'm going to very carefully position my transfer where I want it to go, and then I'm going to start rubbing it down. Now this is a curved surface, so you definitely want to go really slow while you're doing this. I will be getting a couple of creases here. I don't mind that, but if you do mind, something you can do, which I do show you on, I think it's the 3rd pot, I do actually cut some little slits in the side of the transfer plastic just to make it a little bit easier to rub the design down. I've been having a lot of fun with the new IOD transfers. Let me know in the comments if you've tried any of the new designs. So after I have transferred each of the images, hopefully you can see that I do use my fingers to very carefully press it down, and I also use some of that backing sheet as well to help burnish it. For my 3rd pot, I selected this single floral design, so I'm very carefully trimming that out, and you will see here that I do actually come in after I've pressed it down, and I am going to take my scissors shortly and I'm going to put in a few little cuts just to make it a little bit easier for me to manipulate the transfer and get it to attach in the different sections. It can be a little bit tricky working on curved surfaces, so this is just one of the ways that you can make your life a little bit easier. Next, I'm going to use some 220 grit sandpaper to very lightly scuff up the designs. I want them to look a little bit more vintage. This is also going to help flatten out any little wrinkles that I may not have been able to get down. And once I've done that, I will carefully wipe off the sanding dust, and then I'm going to use IOD's crackle stamp from the Vintage Textures stamp with their IOD permanent black ink. And I'm going to work my way around the little pots and just add a little bit of that crackle effect. Now I have already sealed these little pots, that's why they look a little bit shiny. I sealed them with Rustoleum's Satin spray, so here I'm able to come in and wipe back a little bit of that ink just to tone down a little bit of that intensity, and because we have that sealer on there, it makes it a little bit easier to do this. I don't know that you can do that with other inks. I have heard other people say that they've found that other inks sometimes smudge, but I can tell you that it works really nicely with the IOD ink. You can really tone down the intensity of that black. I then decided I wanted to add a detail around the top of the pot, so this is actually a little twine ribbon that I got off Temu. I have measured it around the outside, and once I know how much I need, I will trim off the excess, and I'm going to be using my hot glue gun to attach the ribbon so that if somebody wants, they can actually take it off. All they have to do is heat it back up again, but it's also going to be able to stay in one place, so I'm going to attach that to each of my pots. Once I had attached the twine ribbon to each of the pots, I thought about adding a bow, so I just made a real little simple bow here, just made 2 loops and then pulled them together, but I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to add those, so I did decide to sit it off to one side while I had to think about it, and I decided to add some greenery. These are some picks that I got from Temu that I'm just going to cut apart, so you can see I'm just working out how much I need. I'm bending the stems. I'm not going to glue these in, and unfortunately the gap is a little bit too small for any floral foam. I then decided that I was going to add those little bows, so I'm just adding a little dab of glue and I'm going to attach a little bow to each of our little pots. And here's our finished pots. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I feel like they were a little bit underwhelming before, and now I feel like with those transfers and the ribbon that they're quite cute. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video and that perhaps it's given you some ideas on how you can use some of the new IOD transfers. Let me know in the comments if you had a favourite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out to a friend that you think might enjoy it. If you're new here, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.